My brother got a luxury watch for his birthday. Dad said, "You deserve the best." I opened my gift, a secondhand toaster. Mom laughed. "Now you can learn to cook." I quietly packed my things and left. 4 days later, my parents called in shock. "Why haven't you come home?" I, 24M, got a secondhand toaster while my brother got a luxury watch. I sat at the dining table watching the golden wrapping paper fall away from my brother's gift. The Rolex box gleamed under the chandelier. Dad clapped him on the shoulder and told him he deserved the best, that his promotion at the firm was just the beginning of great things. Mom was already taking photos, gushing about how handsome it looked on his wrist. Then they turned to me. My gift came in a plastic grocery bag. No wrapping, no card. I pulled out the toaster and felt the weight of it in my hands. It was old, scratched, with someone else's crumbs still stuck in the slots. Mom laughed and said now I could finally learn to cook, that maybe I'd stop being such a burden. Dad didn't even look up from admiring my brother's watch. I set the toaster down carefully. I thanked them. I excused myself and went upstairs to my childhood bedroom. It took me 40 minutes to pack everything that mattered. Clothes, documents, laptop, the few things I'd bought with my own money from my part-time job at the community college library. I left behind everything they'd ever given me. The bed, the desk, the books they bought when they still pretended to care about my education. I took the toaster, though. I don't know why. I walked out the front door while they were still celebrating downstairs. Nobody noticed. I'd been saving money for 2 years. Not much, but enough for a security deposit and first month's rent on a studio apartment across town. I'd found it weeks ago just in case. I'd always told myself I was being paranoid, that things weren't really that bad. But I kept the listing saved anyway. The apartment was small and the heating didn't work great, but it was mine. I slept on an air mattress that first night, and it was the best sleep I'd had in years. Day 1 passed. My phone stayed silent. Day 2, I started my shifts at the library like normal. My coworker asked if I was okay. I told her I was great. She didn't believe me, but she didn't push. Day 3, I bought groceries with my own money. Made my own meals. Used the toaster for the first time. It worked fine. Day 4, my phone exploded. Mom called first. She was crying, asking why I hadn't come home. Where was I? What was wrong with me? I let it go to voicemail. Then Dad called. His message was angry, demanding I return immediately, saying I was being dramatic and childish. My brother texted asking what my problem was and why I was upsetting Mom. I blocked all of them, but they found me anyway. Day 6, they showed up at the library during my shift. My supervisor had to ask them to leave when Dad started raising his voice in the reference section. Mom kept crying, making a scene, asking how I could do this to them. I stayed in the back office until they left. That night, my brother came alone. He knocked on my apartment door for 20 minutes. I didn't answer. He finally slid a note under the door telling me I was tearing the family apart, that I needed to think about someone other than myself for once. The note also mentioned that Mom was so distraught she'd stopped eating, that Dad was worried sick. I threw the note away. A week passed. Then 2. The calls and messages slowed down, but never fully stopped. They tried different approaches. Guilt, anger, bargaining. Mom sent me a long email about how much she loved me and how she didn't understand what she'd done wrong. Dad sent me a text saying I was cut off from any family financial support, as if I'd been receiving any. My brother tried the reasonable approach, suggesting family therapy, saying everyone just wanted to talk. He never once acknowledged the watch, never mentioned the toaster. I kept going to work, kept paying my bills, kept living my quiet life. Then my grandmother called. I almost didn't answer because I thought they'd gotten to her, convinced her to guilt trip me. But her voice was different. Soft. Sad. She asked if she could visit. Just her. I said yes. She showed up with groceries and helped me put them away without commenting on my small kitchen or cheap furniture. We sat on my secondhand couch and she made tea in my one nice mug. She asked me to tell her everything. So I did. I told her about being 12 and bringing home straight A's the same day my brother brought home B's, and how they took him out for dinner while I got a nod. I told her about applying to colleges and getting into a good one with a partial scholarship, and how Dad said it was too expensive and I should go to community college instead, but then they paid full tuition for my brother at a private university. I told her about working 2 jobs through college while living at home and being expected to contribute to household expenses while my brother got an allowance. I told her about every birthday, every Christmas, every achievement that went unnoticed while my brother's mediocrity was celebrated. I told her about the toaster. My grandmother didn't interrupt. She just listened, her tea getting cold in her hands. When I finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she told me something I didn't know. She said that when I was born, my parents were struggling financially. Dad's business had failed and Mom had just lost her job. I was an unplanned pregnancy. They weren't ready. Then, 3 years later, when they were stable again, they had my brother. He was planned, wanted, the baby they'd meant to have when they were ready. She said she'd watched them treat us differently our whole lives. She tried to intervene, tried to talk to them, but they didn't see it. In their minds, they loved us equally. They just had higher expectations for my brother because they'd invested more in him. They saw me as resilient, independent, someone who didn't need as much attention. I asked her why she never told me. She said she'd hoped they'd realize it themselves, that they'd wake up before it was too late. She squeezed my hand and told me she was proud of me, that leaving took courage, that I deserved better. After she left, I cried for the first time since moving out. 3 weeks after I left, my parents showed up at my grandmother's house demanding she tell them where I lived. She refused. Dad threatened to cut her off from family events. She told him she'd raised him better than this, and if he couldn't see what he'd done wrong, he had more problems than just a missing son. My brother called her a traitor in the family group chat. She left the group chat. A month in, I got a letter from Mom. Not an email, an actual handwritten letter. It was 6 pages long. She wrote about her childhood, about being the least favored among her siblings, about how much it hurt. She wrote about promising herself she'd never do that to her own children. She wrote about not understanding where she went wrong. She never apologized for the toaster. She never acknowledged the pattern. She wanted me to explain where things went wrong, as if it was a mystery she couldn't solve, as if she'd somehow loved us equally and I was just being sensitive. I didn't write back. My brother tried a different approach. He sent me a screenshot of a job posting at his firm, entry-level, but with good pay. He said he'd put in a word for me, that this was my chance to get my life together. He said if I came back and apologized to Mom and Dad, we could all move forward. I blocked his number too. 2 months after I left, I got a promotion at the library. It wasn't much, but it came with better hours and a small raise. I started taking online classes to finish my bachelor's degree. I made friends with my neighbors. I adopted a cat from the shelter. I built a life without them. 3 months in, my grandmother told me Mom had been asking about me at church, telling people I'd abandoned the family over a misunderstanding. Playing the victim. Dad was telling business associates I was going through a phase, that I'd be back once I matured. My brother was telling his friends I was jealous of his success. None of them understood. For months after I left, I ran into my brother at a coffee shop. I saw him first and tried to leave, but he caught up to me outside. He looked tired, stressed. He asked if we could talk. I told him no. He said the family wasn't the same without me. That Mom was depressed. That Dad missed me, even if he couldn't say it. That they wanted me to come to Sunday dinner, that we could work things out. I asked him if he still had the watch. He looked confused. Said of course he did. I asked him if he knew what I got for my birthday. He hesitated. Said he remembered I got something for the kitchen. He didn't remember what. I walked away. 5 months in, Dad had a minor health scare. Nothing serious, but enough that the family rallied around him. My grandmother called to let me know, but said she understood if I didn't want to visit. Mom sent me a text saying Dad was asking for me. My brother sent a long message about family responsibility and being there when it counts. I sent flowers to the hospital. No card. No name. My grandmother told me later that when the flowers arrived, Mom cried and insisted they were from me. Dad threw them away. He said if I couldn't show up in person, he didn't want my empty gestures. 6 months after I left, I finished my degree. I walked across the stage at my community college graduation with my grandmother in the audience. She was the only family I invited. She brought flowers and took photos and took me to dinner after. She told me she'd never been more proud. I didn't tell my parents. They found out through social media when one of my friends posted a photo. Mom called crying, asking why I didn't tell them, saying they would have come. I didn't answer. My brother sent a congratulatory text that felt obligatory. He mentioned his firm again. Said the offer still stood. I deleted the message. 7 months in, things had settled into a new normal. I had my apartment, my job, my cat, my life. The calls from my parents had dwindled to occasional check-ins that felt more like territory marking than genuine concern. My grandmother visited every other week. We'd have dinner and talk about everything except them. Then my brother got engaged. The announcement came through social media. Big ring, beautiful girlfriend, perfect photos. I felt nothing. My grandmother called to warn me they'd want me at the wedding. She was right. Mom called the next day, suddenly warm and loving, saying this was a time for family to come together. Dad sent a formal email saying my presence was expected, that we could put our differences aside for one day. My brother texted asking me to be a groomsman. I said no to all of them. The backlash was immediate. I was selfish, cruel, holding grudges over nothing, ruining my brother's special day, tearing the family apart. The messages came from extended family members I barely knew, all telling me the same thing. Get over it. Show up. Be the bigger person. I muted all of them. 8 months after I left, I got offered a full-time position at a university library in another state. Better pay, better benefits, better everything. I accepted immediately. I told my grandmother over dinner. She cried, but she smiled. She said she'd miss me, but understood. She made me promise to call every week. I told my parents through a brief email. I was moving. Don't contact me. I'd reach out if and when I was ready. I didn't give them the address. Mom responded with paragraphs about abandonment and betrayal. Dad's response was one sentence saying I was making a mistake. My brother didn't respond at all. I moved 2 weeks later. The new city was different. Bigger, colder, but full of possibilities. I found a better apartment, made new friends, started fresh. Nobody here knew about the toaster or the watch or the family I'd left behind. My grandmother was my only connection to my old life. Through her, I heard updates I never asked for. My brother's wedding was beautiful. Mom cried the whole time about my empty seat. Dad gave a speech about family that everyone said was moving. My brother got promoted again. None of it touched me. A year after I left, I met someone. She was kind and funny and treated me like I mattered. When I eventually told her about my family, she held my hand and said she understood. Her family wasn't great either. We built something together based on choice, not obligation. 15 months in, my grandmother had a stroke. I flew back immediately. Sat by her hospital bed. She recovered mostly, but she was weaker now. Needed care. I arranged everything from my new state, made sure she had the best help, visited as often as I could. My parents showed up at the hospital while I was there. The moment was surreal. Mom looked older. Dad looked smaller somehow. They saw me and froze. Mom started crying immediately. Dad's jaw clenched. They didn't approach. My grandmother, weak but alert, told them to leave me alone. They tried to argue. She got agitated. The nurses asked them to go. They left, but not before Mom whispered that I looked good, that she missed me. I felt nothing. My brother came separately, found me in the cafeteria. He sat down without asking, told me we needed to talk, that this had gone on long enough, that I was being ridiculous. He said I'd made my point, but it was time to grow up. I asked him what point he thought I'd made. He said I was angry about the birthday thing, that I felt overlooked, that I wanted attention. He said he understood, but I needed to let it go. I asked if he knew my middle name. He didn't. I asked if he knew what I studied in college. He guessed wrong. I asked if he knew where I worked. He said a library somewhere. I asked if he remembered a single conversation we'd had in the last 5 years that wasn't about him. He got angry, said I was being unfair, that he'd been busy, that I couldn't expect him to know everything. He said family was supposed to forgive, to move past things, to be there for each other. I told him family was also supposed to notice when you existed. He left angry. 18 months after I left, my grandmother moved into an assisted living facility near me. I visited her 3 times a week. We played cards, watched her favorite shows, talked about my life, my girlfriend, my work. She never brought up my parents unless I asked. Sometimes I asked. She told me Mom had started therapy, that Dad was reading self-help books about parenting, that my brother was busy planning to have kids, that they all still asked about me, that they all still didn't understand. 2 years after I left, my girlfriend and I got engaged. Small ceremony planned. Just friends and my grandmother. No one else. My grandmother asked gently if I was sure, if I'd regret not inviting them. I told her I was certain. She nodded and never asked again. My parents found out through mutual acquaintances. The calls started again. Mom begging to be included. Dad angry that I'd cut them out of such an important moment. My brother sending long texts about how I was being petty, how I'd regret this, how I was destroying the family over ancient history. I changed my number. The wedding was perfect. Small, intimate, full of people who actually knew me. My grandmother cried happy tears. My wife's family welcomed me like I'd always belonged. No one mentioned the people who weren't there. We honeymooned in Europe, sent my grandmother postcards, came back to our life. I built a career, published research, got promoted, bought a house, lived a full, complete life without them. Sometimes people asked about my family. I said we weren't close. They rarely pushed. 3 years after I left, I still had the toaster. It sat in my garage, still with those same crumbs. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away or use it. It was a monument to something I couldn't quite name. My wife suggested I didn't need to keep punishing myself by holding on to it. She was right. I threw it away that weekend. I didn't need it anymore. I'd already learned to cook just fine on my own.